accept. Lights, action. What? Tape that down, Sally.
Hello? Hello? One more test.
No, we're not going to walk through there.
Test number 74.
Comes in.
Hello?
Hello.
Your only word is going in and
Do you know what to do?
Well, this is number one.
That's number
This is
one.
number two.
Yeah, and
This is number three.
yeah, and I can tell you,
No sign on these.
and on the third one there is, yeah, which goes on that. Yeah.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Oh,
Battery power
wait,
up.
I was.
seats where you are and look up toward the projection booth to the, as you face it, left of the clock, and there she be, Yvonne Rayner. We're delighted to have her here. Most of you, I'm sure, are here because you know about her work or have read about it, and it is, in fact, all that you expect. I'm sure. I haven't seen this particular piece that will be showing tonight myself, so it's as new to me as to you. But just from the organizing and the setup this afternoon and the few small tests that were made to get things centered and where she wanted them, I'm anticipating at least a technical feat for this old auditorium. And the content, of course, I leave to Yvonne, but it will be an extension of where she has been before, a continuation in development of where she has been before. Great concern with word and image, their relationship to each other, and of course the audience's relationship to them. Yvonne, are you going to talk a little bit about it beforehand, or are you going into it?
I just want to say a few explanatory things. What you will see is a work print. It lasts about 2 hours. It's a work print in the final stages of editing. In fact, I put it back together for this occasion, and it is the last performance of this work. I have been presenting it as a performance since around February in various places in the country and in Europe. It is a performance because there is no, with the exception of the third reel, there's no soundtrack. I provide the soundtrack with my voice and with cues for the tape recorder. The last reel is a slop print, which means it's not very good quality. It's made simply from the work print itself, so you still see splices, but it does have an optical track. It has a very complicated interrelation of music and movement, body movement. I'll be happy to talk more about it afterwards. Otherwise, we're ready to go. The 3 reels will be shown in continuity. There will be no breaks. Okay, turn that on. This is, okay. It's a long film. It's hard to sit afterwards. I mean, I imagine. There's one section that's missing. It's 5 minutes, and there are about 60 cuts in it, and it's too complicated with voiceover, and so I didn't include it. It's called An Emotional Accretion in 49 Steps, and It's about Renfrew and Dempster, a certain episode in their relationship. And it has a continuity that is carried from much faster than any place else in the film, from image to voiceover to print in very quick succession in all kinds of combinations. And it's something I'm most interested in the film to see, and I look forward to people's responses, and I wish I could have brought it. Because I'm very interested in how one follows a narrative, or how widely spaced you can. And I'm learning a lot of it is about timing. It's not just about juxtapositions, but the timing of the particular juxtapositions. Are there any questions? Yeah. That music you heard, this La Sonnambula, that is the last half of that section, and it occurs after the ocean. Somehow she suspects she has failed miserably is a title on the ocean, the first ocean. She had said to herself, let him figure it out for both of us. And then, still on the ocean, you hear voiceover. She tries to go back to the earliest move that had launched this particular series of faux pas. And then you see the title, An Emotional Accretion in 49 Steps. And then you proceed to see numbers. And the numbers are either alone on the screen in the frame when they precede an image, like the enacted image, or they occur directly over an intertitle. So each stage of this series is numbered and goes from 1 to 49. And the last half of it is all synced up with the music in a very funny way. Like at one point, you hear the tenor's voice, and there you see Dempster. They go to a party, and the party is this jumble of furniture, like the couch is tipped up on the table, and Renfrew is standing in front of it, and Dempster comes around and says, let's go to my place, and the tenor is singing. It's kind of a caricature. And the bed, when they go to his place and they lie in the bed, there's a mattress on this table that you saw, that heavy oak table. So everything is a little askew in the whole thing. And it ends with this build-up on the opera, reaching its crescendo, and on the last note of the crescendo is in parenthesis my editorial comment, do you think she could figure her way out of a paper bag? And then blam, the opera ends, and it's close-up of Renfrew saying, I'd like to kick your ass in. And then it goes on to, then there's an intertitle, Oh Christ, he'll never screw me again. And there's a whole thing on that, and then it goes to more opera, a different aria than the one you heard. And this whole business with the movie, what movie, which ends in the close-up of Shirley. So I used I reversed the two arias. You only heard one tonight. Any other questions? Yeah. I wrote it all in some. I invented most of it. In some cases, it is my memories of actual conversations I've had or overheard. I'd have to go through the script. I should have brought it down. There are some quotes. That place where the trout, what I call the trout sequence, where you see Renfrew eating, and then the pans over the table, and the voiceover, it'll be John's voice at the very beginning, which makes her stop eating and look, and then there's a pan following her look. It's a quote from Willie Mays when he did his last ball game, and he was interviewed afterwards, and it was very moving. He said, "Willie, say goodbye to America." And tears are streaming down his face. He'll never play another game, and he's been playing ball for years and years. And oh, thank you. So I transformed that into yes. I'm interested in some of these places in throwing in conversation as though there has been a naturalistic conversation, but what you're hearing is just some highlight from it. So it's as though John, and my direction to the performers is always in this context, as though, yes, say it as though you're just reporting about this episode, describing this episode that you saw on TV. So he says, yes, he said, "Willie, say goodbye to America." And, most of it I have written myself. Yeah, let me see if I can find another quote. Oh, I said I don't think she really wanted to die. She just wanted to be asleep, to not be alive, to stop the pain of that Saturday night. It was, I think, in Ms. Magazine about the death of Marilyn Monroe. I don't remember the context other than that. There are a lot of inside, not a lot, but I don't think it matters. I use my own previous work in certain ways. For instance, the quick shot of the woman in the long dress jumping, with her head disappearing off the top of the frame. That's a quote from my previous film, which had that woman, Valda Setterfield, in it in a major role. And Renfrew's voiceover is, and I would have put some jumps in that solo and maybe a longer fade at the end of that shot on the stairs. And then you see the shot on the stairs, which was an outtake from that film. It was never used in the previous film, and I used it in this film, which establishes the involvement of Renfrew, at least for that moment, as someone who has made work, who has made a solo, who has made a film. Yeah. Who? No, that's Epcotkus. No, Valda was just the woman jumping very briefly toward the beginning. Yeah, very quick guest appearance. Yeah. A great deal of it. How much of this is autobiographical? I use autobiography as a source material, and I change it around and distort it and emphasize certain things. And how much? I couldn't. A lot of it, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The question has to do with narrative and what my thoughts are about it. Especially, it's not being done very much today, except in commercial cinema. Well, I'm interested in certain subject matter, and how do you deal with that subject matter, like the subject of love, and how do you deal with it in ways other than narrative? I'm not I wouldn't say I'm a particularly, I've had arguments with friends about this, imagistic or visual person. I mean, I haven't come out of the visual arts. I guess I have I'm reasserting a certain aspect of my temperament or sensibility that was only partially used when I was a dancer, and that is my the literary aspect of my potential. And so I start out writing a lot. I mean, this script was in the making now for 3 years, and from the script and from paragraphs, it seems to be not only a literary bent, but a certain kind of literary bent where an idea is completed within a paragraph. And so it's a very obvious kind of structural problem. How do you link up these paragraphs? And you start linking up paragraphs, you're getting into storytelling. And whether the paragraphs are transposed into imagery or in the narrative, the verbal part of it stays or disappears. That's another thing that constantly happens. There are things in the editing of this that I was quite amazed at. I may be getting off the subject, but I'll come back to it. My decision making process often takes in some very limited aspect of two juxtapositions. For instance, at the very beginning, it was very dark here. Some of the very dark shots that suffered from the brown wall, but maybe you made out the man and the little girl looking at the TV at the very beginning. And it's a circular pan track. The voiceover there is the man danced with the 3-year-old child, and that had been written at a certain time. And then I thought up this image. What do I want to put that with? Well, I want to put it with something that is about a man and a child. I didn't think about it any more than that. What do a man and a child do in this room? Okay, he's looking at the tube, and she's playing with something. And she had brought to the shooting that day this object, and I said, well, why don't you just look at it? And I didn't think about it until we went to edit the voice on it, that it's an exact a paradigm for the voiceover, the one person playing with a smaller object or a smaller thing. It's about scale and it's about manipulation, and the man and the child. So there are these three things going on. The man and the child dancing, the man and the child and the TV, and the child and the smaller thing. And, narrative just automatically happens when you combine words with an image, I think. And since my subject matter is kind of circular, it keeps coming back to the same things over and over in different places, the beach, the house. There is just whether I don't know how I could avoid narrative with the kinds of materials I'm dealing with, and it is an interesting problem. And I know in my next work, I don't know whether I will retain. It seems to be pretty. I really am involved in this episodic quality, so I think I do try to avoid certain kinds of continuity that relate more to a specific story in a specific time slot, and that's what I want to avoid. So it's about an unspecified period of time. It might be 5 years, or it might be a week, or it's a year. There's summer and winter in it, obviously. Yeah. Yeah, to sum it up, I really think it's the outcome of dealing with literary means and psychological content. Yeah. the fact that I am. Uh-huh. Oh yeah, yeah. But that's why film seems such a logical avenue for me. Yeah. Mm. Mm-hmm. Can't answer that. Yeah. Well, I just it's connected to the previous subject. When my subject matter changed, in other words, the focus on the body changed to a focus on the emotions. Um, it seemed to require a different a way of defining the body in a psychological space, which is the filmic frame, much more to me than this stage frame. You don't notice me now in a psychological context unless I point it out to you. I mean, you're busy listening to my words, and I can call your attention now to the tension in my left hand or the hunch of my shoulders or something like that, and it puts it into that kind of focus. But with film, I think you can do that much more clearly and directly. But I still do performances. I'm finding ways through a mixture of slides and live action to deal with this subject matter also. So that doesn't entirely answer the question about why film, but it's terribly exciting and absorbing, and there is a kind of a specificity and demand for narrowing down your vision and your concept in a way that I've never experienced in making a theater work, especially one that I perform in, and being outside of this thing and really controlling it, I find very exciting. Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's a way of taking the focus off of these characters and combining the voiceover with other things than the people, and yeah. Oh yeah, well that's a very manipulative kind of device at the beginning. The opening shot is people looking at slides. Maybe you don't realize that, the light flashing in their faces, yeah. And then you see slides, you see things they're reading, which are what the voiceover is reading. And then you see them looking at slides of themselves. And then you see full frame, as though they are actually there. And in some instances, in almost sequential succession, you see they've just looked at a slide of Renfrew and John at the Battery in New York, and then you see full frame them there, and you know it's not a still. You see the wind and moving the clothing. So that whole business of family or posing and nostalgia is evoked by the very idea of posing for a camera, home movies, and so that's focused on deliberately. Mm-hmm. Well, I should ask you that. I'm interested. Do you have difficulty? I mean, it's. glad to know that. Hmm. Um, hmm. I was mainly interested to hear you say it wasn't too long, because it is long, and uh, I think the difficulty lies in that most works one sees the premise, unless it's a story and you're trying to figure out what's going to happen next and you don't know. And but in most say what I'll call aesthetically based works, the initial premise of the work is set up right at the beginning, and you know what to expect, and there are very few surprises in it. And I'm interested in it. I used to put it very crudely for myself, but now it's gone beyond that. Like thwarting expectations. It isn't about that. It's about getting a range of closeness and separation of several things going on at the same time. So sometimes you're listening to exactly what you're looking at, and sometimes you're looking at only some of the things you're hearing, and sometimes they are totally almost diametrically opposed to each other, but you're able to adjust. Once you get used to this, you're able to adjust to the fact that what you're hearing applies to something you already saw or maybe will see. And I find I explore more and more that range of juxtaposition of sight and sound. Uh-huh. That's interesting. I wonder about that. I sometimes think only a choreographer or dancer could have made this, but I don't know. Yeah. Mm. 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 Well, you see my involvement with the body constantly. Yeah. So that, of course, comes right out of dealing with dance and movement. I don't know how to talk about it other than that. The last reel, those are actual. Those are poses taken from photographs and drawings of Isadora Duncan, and there are there are 20 of them, and it's basically intercutting long shot and close up. Yeah. Mm. Mm. I don't know whether there's some correspondence. I think it would take a linguist or some special kind of psychologist to look at my work, and it would be impossible because the dance work no longer exists. But the kinds of connections I made in my theater work, physically, what the correspondence is in the kinds of sequential connections I make, or simultaneous connections I make here. I haven't thought too much about that. Yeah. Mm. That's something that comes right out of working on a stage, I think. Yeah, and it's one reason I think I'm not drawn to video. It has no, and I think it's about video and the suggestion, even though it's distorted, of depth in video. And the flatness of the screen, even though you can get the illusion of depth with the camera, I relate very much to that two-dimensional quality. And my dances very often used space in this way. I mean, there was, and my performances now, I can dance on a very narrow space, or use a very narrow space. I think of, I don't know why that is. There are, there's a shot tracking back. There are a lot of, there's use of depth there, but why is it you don't notice it so much? The overall impact is of a two-dimensionality. I mean, there are a lot of shots where the image gets farther away and closer, which is about going forward and back with the camera, but you didn't get that overall impression of it. Even the outdoor, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that has to do with the staticness of the camera, which I owe to Warhol. I used one of my early, he made a great impression on me, that what you see within the frame, and a frame that remains very static. And so even in, like outdoors, you're very aware of that framing, I think. And I agree. Mm-hmm. Hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, oh, it's yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. That's a goof. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. There was that confused moment. I'd forgotten I had it on tape and I was reading it. It was. You expected me to say that? Yeah. 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 Right. That's. Well, I did that in other places, and that's very much a part of the performance aspect of this. You're aware of my presence. I mean, every now and then I say that this will be a dissolve or a slow fade, or there are a number of dissolves and fades in it. They won't be all straight cuts. No, that goof was that's kind of unfortunate. It's a whole sequence of speeches. Oh yeah, about the Saturday night and. Let me correct it now that we're at it. The opera has ended, and they're sitting around, and then you see a close-up of Shirley, and you hear Renfrew's voice. Doesn't that make you think of the movie? There's a long pause. Shirley says, "What movie?" You hear Renfrew's voice, 2001, which is a joke because of course, it's not the music from 2001, but the previous intertitle had said, her thoughts drifted back to the first time she heard the music. Her brother had just begun to collect 78s, and Strauss, Mahler, and Beethoven daily flooded the house. none of which you're listening to, of course. But so Shirley says, "Oh yes, of course. Only in the movies can you send your mind away." And then you hear my voice over saying, for some reason she is embarrassed about her reverie. Like in that long shot, Shirley has been absolutely still, and you see Renfrew and Dempster talking, and Renfrew somewhat animated on the couch. Then, still on the close-up of Shirley, you hear Dempster's voice. I don't think she really wanted to die. She just wanted to be. And then in the middle of this, it cuts to the long shot where the camera starts to go in close, and the furniture is now reversed, so Shirley is over on the left. I don't think she really wanted to die. She just wanted to be asleep, to not be alive, to stop the pain of that Saturday night. And Renfrew, I think she makes a movement. She drops her arm. And then he says again, I said, I don't think she really wanted to die. She just wanted to be asleep, to not be alive, to stop the pain of that Saturday night. Renfrew crosses her legs. And then Renfrew starts to go out toward the right of the frame. And just as she's going out, you see, I hope it was almost a mistake. She should have been in a little longer. But she says, always it was someone's passion that started me off. And then we start tracking in totally to Shirley and that object on the table. And you hear his voice. I'm just not going to get excited about it. I know you're distorting things for the sake of fiction, exaggerating and displacing and so forth. And then you hear Renfrew's voice, and that's when Shirley raises her eyes and looks. Renfrew says, that's such a relief. I had thought you'd be angry at the way I referred to your work. I would have done it so differently. Shirley drops her eyes, and you hear Dempster, I'd make a few changes myself. I would have had that intertitle. I dreamed of my mother last night and of my wife. My wife was crying for me. I would have shown somehow that he was really thinking of someone else. And then you see this intertitle. I dreamed of my mother last night and of my husband. My husband was crying for me. And then you see another intertitle. She is really thinking about the way crumbs of food collect at the corners of his mouth when he eats. Now, I don't know whether you picked up later, this hand comes out and takes the crumb off of John's. And then you see Valda very briefly in the long dress jumping, and you hear Renfrew's voice. And I would have put some jumps in that solo and maybe a longer fade at the end of that shot on the stairs, and then you see this long thing that I don't know whether you could make out. It was a very complicated setup with photo murals of people. Some of the people are real, some are not, and some, and then they topple off. And the woman on the back of the guy on the stairs has feathered wings on. And there's a big metaphorical reference to not only the previous film, but to the theater work that preceded the film. All of which is not necessary to know, it's just that they are talking about work that they have done, and I wanted to establish that about them, that they are involved with some kind of work. Yeah. Yeah. In this film, it was the very beginning of something now, which I'm now exploring more. A big thorn in my side, which means it's just something I haven't been able to deal with, is acting. I have never dealt with Dempster Leach, the guy with the beard in this. He's the only actor I have ever worked with. And he presented to me very special problems. He was able to read a line as though he were a father, the same line as though he were the son, as though he were the angry lover, as though he presented me with such a range of possibilities. He totally confused me. I mean, all I want is at first, all I wanted was a reading that was as though someone were reading, which is the way I read. I wanted something flattened out, very little emotion. The emotion is in the line, in the words. I mean, the script is so loaded with emotion. I didn't want any acting on top of it. And like Renfrew has never performed in her life, and I had thought that long speech about the necklace, I would have to work very hard with her. And the first time she did it, it was perfect. She said it in the only way she knew how. She had no choice. It was, she just kind of felt it out. It just worked. And I had had no preconceptions about it, but I had the feeling that it might not sound right, and I'd have to really pin down my own intentions. I had no intentions about it, about an interpretation of it. Now I'm getting interested in certain ways of saying a line so it sounds as though it is something, but the next minute you're saying it in a way that totally changes the context, so that two lines coming out of the same people are as though they are the angry lover, and then they're the this, and then they're the that, so you're constantly getting flipped around about what this character is or what the situation is, and I'm getting very fascinated by that. So it does get interacting. There's no good example in this, but I can talk about it because I've just come fresh from having done a performance that, for instance, it involved lines spoken by, this is a performance for John Erdman and me, and you've just heard on tape a reading of quotes from Godard's criticism. And the tape goes off, and there's a long pause, and John leans toward me, and I have him say a line like this: do you know who wrote all that? Like that. And I go, which? And he says, those lines I was just reading. And I say, who? And he says, Godard. God, I love him. So from this, do you know who wrote, this very deliberated, you get into a kind of naturalistic, spontaneous give and take. So that's, it's challenging. I still don't know what acting is all about, and most of the time when I see it in films, and when I see actors, great performances, I think that person took the film out of the hands of the director. I get very insecure around people who can act, I think Brando stole that film right out of Bertolucci's hands. He didn't know what to do with the man, but I could see how it would be, to think about interpretation of verbal material, it's a place I have to go. I have to not be so totally committed to this flattened out way of speaking that I have been. Yeah. Rougier, and at one point in the early 60s, in fact, my latest work is called Christina, and in parentheses, for a ... novella, which is a reference to For a New Novel, which I think is one of the books that influenced me as more than any critical writing, much more than his novels. I don't like his novels at all, but what he wrote, and at the time I read it about narrative and naturalism and theater or writing was very important to me. Yeah. I live and work in Manhattan, and I teach. I had been teaching at the School of Visual Arts for 6 years, a course called Approaches to Performance. I was teaching undergraduate people involved in painting and sculpture. And at the beginning it was a kind of dance class for non-professionals, and gradually it got more and more theoretical, and I don't know what, it began to fall apart. I don't know what to teach anymore. But now I'm involved at the Whitney Resources Center, which is an educational adjunct of the Whitney Museum. And it's mainly looking at people's work and talking. They're painters. I find myself talking about painting, which is rather weird. But talking about art problems and on a one-to-one basis, it's not formalized at all. And I'll be teaching at California Art Institute for 2.5 months, beginning in January. And those will probably be dancers as well as theater people. California Institute of the Arts, yeah. No, I don't. No, I'm not. My films have been shown in women's film festivals, but I'm not directly involved with any women's film group or women's group. Yeah. I'd be interested to have you elaborate about how the film invades you, but literally and physically, I maintain a formal separation in my theater work. Oh, mm. Mm. I don't think you'll have this so much when the film is finished. There will be nothing over on the right. It'll all be it'll be an autonomous film. Oh yeah, yeah. Oh, and also that goes back. Yeah, it's a reference to a self-consciousness about performing. Yeah, and that reference to the camera. Godard has done that a lot. A lot of people have done that. Yeah, yeah. My school of thought. In dance or why dance? I mean, oh, who do I respect? Who do I like? There is a filmmaker who is not too well known, and he is American. He lives in New York, and I don't think he has gotten the attention he deserves. I was shocked to find out after about a year ago to see a film of his called Casual Relations. His name is Mark Rappaport. And to see he was using a lot of the same devices that I am, in a different way, but using literary puns and in alternating print and image and voiceover. He's much more concerned with movie history in a certain way than I am. But there was this breadth of references and devices. And he is very involved with opera. I think you would like his latest film. He's incredibly involved with opera. In his latest work, he actually has non-professional people. They have learned the words and the melodies of opera. And the soundtrack is going to go back and forth between the professionals singing and these voices. And I've heard a little bit of it. It's very strange. You gotta say it. Yeah. Casual Relations was shown at the First Avenue screening room for a week. Yeah, you may have. Let's see. I admire Hollis Frampton's work, and lately I've been impressed by the German Fassbinder, who is Werner Rainer Fassbinder. He's very successful in Europe, very well known there, and his films are only beginning to be shown here. A lot of Godard's films, some of which I hate, some I like. You know, he's done so many kinds of things. Chelsea Girls is one of my favorite films of all time, and yeah. Dreyer, and dancers in dancing today. I think the Grand Union is doing about the most interesting stuff around. Tricia Brown. Who else? I don't go to the theater much anymore. I'd like to see. I've never seen anything of Charles Ludlam. I feel rather badly about that. Don't bother? Oh. 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 I haven't seen it. It was one I heard on the radio, and Sutherland is so, I thought she's pretty beautiful. Yeah. Oh, you know of you have a more favorite, private recording. Pirate. Oh, who sings it? Oh. A camp. Oh, I didn't use it as a camp at all. No, I didn't. Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, I know nothing. I don't follow opera, and I can't say I'm very knowledgeable. The music I use. Usually, I hear. I happen to have the radio on, or Maria Elena. I'm embarrassed to say, I did not. I had never heard it in my life before a year ago, where I was sitting in a Loewy's movie house during the day, waiting for the feature to go on at 12 o'clock. I got there. It was the kind of day where I wanted to go to a movie the minute I got out of bed, and there was Maria Elena, the Baja Marimba Band, and that particular song got me. And I didn't know it was very popular, and I showed this in Cologne during the summer, and there was a Dutch guy there, and he said, "Oh, I so enjoyed hearing Maria Elena." And I thought I had this real obscure song. Oh yeah, sure. Only in the broadest sense. I think what Richard is saying, or his devices, yeah, some of his ploys, let's say, a certain kind of self-consciousness and self-reference, reference to the act of making the work, and yeah, I follow everything Richard does. It's usually quite interesting. Yeah, my theater work is totally different. I mean, in its feeling. But we're peers. We're here at the same time and dealing with a lot of the same formal problems, so there are naturally correspondences. Um, Rather casually. It depends on what people have in their wardrobes, the people I work with. Um, there are some exceptions to that. All the clothes that Renfrew wore were her own clothes. Shirley, I had to go out and buy some clothes. And yeah, I go through people's wardrobes, and there are now exceptions. In my latest work, it's about a female lion tamer. There is a central character who you see in photos, and so I had to buy an outfit close to what she was wearing, which is this two-piece. She's wearing a gold lame two-piece outfit, which I couldn't find anywhere. So I settled for a green sequined trunks and brassiere, which, it's a theatrical kind of thing. So, but generally, I've worn especially in dancing, I've worn the clothes I felt comfortable in moving around in, and didn't try to be a character. The characterization always came through other means, things imposed from via tape or suggestion, narrator, or on the people you saw in front of you. Yeah. Which? Oh, in that yeah. The profile of the person in front. No, that's David Gordon. And it's a photo, right? You saw that. Yeah. Yeah. The look of the people? Oh, that's another thing. I do choose the combinations of people, or I find that I choose people who are very unlikely. They may be stereotypes in themselves, but then when they get together, they're the most unlikely people in the world to ever be associated with each other. That was especially true in my first film, Lives of Performers, where Valda is the lover of Fernando Torm, who is from Chile, and he speaks. You hear his voice all through the film, very heavy Spanish accent, and she in that dress was the stereotype of a femme fatale. And he was like a Latin lover, but then there's something there was something almost a little campy about that combination of people. And Shirley, I'm very interested in, this mature woman who is in a somewhat romantic role, and with a younger man, and that kind of interaction. And then Dempster, who looks a little like Orson Welles. I don't know, it's hard, now that I'm talking about it, it's difficult. For instance, the two dancers at the end, I would never use as the protagonists. They and in the previous film they were dancers also, and the characters are. There's something else I look for. I'm not quite sure what. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, obviously I have a style which I can't arbitrarily decide to get out of. I mean, I think work evolves. I mean, in 5 years I will be out of it. As 5 years ago I was in another, well, just a whole different place. There is something at the back of my mind that I'm almost not ready to talk about, the next film or the next work. I want to get I want to get out of this subject matter. I think I've exhausted it. That people trapped in love, in the difficulties of love. I mean, I'm kind of bored with it. This is 2 years old, you know, in a way, and so. I want to maybe deal with this, but another dimension. Like people, they talk about work. You never see them working. You don't know. They sit around and they at tables. They lie on the beach. They sit on a couch. You know, they're rather inactive. And I see that's something I have to get out of. I want people not necessarily to be running or more athletic or busy, but another dimension of their lives. I was very impressed with Studs Terkel's working, yeah. And I don't know how that will affect my next work, but it gets into the problem of this. This is a terribly bourgeois film. I mean, it could only those problems could only be focused on and gone into at that depth. Not that they're irrelevant or superficial, but gone into to that depth, that with that profoundly, by someone who has leisure to reflect on those things and has certain kinds of pressures, or does not have certain kinds of pressures, like going to a job 9 to 5. And I'm very privileged in that way, very conscious that my work and the work of a lot of people around me is the result of that kind of existing as part of that class. And one of the things that impressed me so about this film of Fassbinder's that I saw at the film festival, it's called Ali. Maybe you've heard about it. It's about a Moroccan, a young Moroccan who's working in an auto plant in Germany, and he marries a 60-year-old woman, and the social repercussions of that, and it's done without condescension, and done by a man who I presume is of my class, and I was very impressed with that, and I wonder how one does that, how one gets into that kind of subject, and how I've been wondering how would you, like the what I call the porn sequence in there came out of a joking conversation with a friend. Oh well, I guess the only way to sell a movie is to put in pornography. How would I? And I was thinking about, I ought to make a pornographic section and just stick it in my first movie. That would really, I was thinking about success, and then I really thought, how would I make an erotic episode in a film? What would I do? How would my fantasies become transposed? And that was the result. And I realized I could not be explicit. I mean, close-ups of copulation were just out of the question. And if you notice, whenever there is close-up of the body, there's no head, and when there's face, there's no body, and it's very chaste in a certain sense. You don't see the involvement of the people via their face, or if you see the face, you don't see what is happening to the body, which seemed very necessary to enhance the suggestion of eroticism as an alternative to explicit pornography. Interchangeably? No, I'm saying this is, I did not make pornography, obviously. I think I made something that is more erotic than pornographic. And when it came, I mean, the challenge of making pornography, when it finally came to realizing it, I realized I couldn't do it and I wasn't interested in it. Yeah. No, I am making a distinction. So it's the same lurking in the back of my mind is the beginning of a necessity to deal with a different kind of social relevance than love and conflict in a love relationship. And I don't know what form that will take. Oh yeah, yeah. I'm quite committed to writing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm very dependent on Babette. She's a superb technician, for one thing. The shooting script was Babette now have and I have a long association. I remember my first meeting with her when we were both we were just laughing about it a couple of nights ago. She could hardly speak English. She's French. She's been here for 3 years, and I was just totally intimidated at being confronted by a professional camera woman. And I remember saying to her, well, I want it to be kind of in between Warhol and Bresson. That's what I went into my first film with. Some vague idea it's going to be a little like this, a little like that. So the first film is very simple. I mean, there's no... I had no idea of framing. In fact, there are 2 whole sections of rehearsal, an actual rehearsal that I'm in. I just said to Babette, you do what you want, and those are her sections. We edited them together, but the camera work is totally hers. I hardly could distinguish between a medium shot and a long shot. I mean, I would look through there and I wouldn't see anything, you know. Then, having done that and looked at it 100 times, when it came to the very first shooting of this, which was the stuff on the beach at Provincetown, all of a sudden I realized I was in a totally different slot and something had happened to me. And this was not going to be like that film. And every shot, if I didn't know what I wanted, by the time I looked through that eyepiece, I had it figured out. So the shooting script, and a lot of it was preconceived. I began to have a lot of fantasies about actual camera movement and changes in the frame. How to get a lot of this, I feel very proud of myself. By the time the shooting, I was able to work out certain kinds of things, and with Babette's approval. I mean, I always check it out with her. Can we do this? Can we do that? Editing now has been another matter, especially editing on the music, which I had no. This print is very crude. We have re-edited that third reel, and there's slight changes in it. It isn't quite so choppy, and we've taken out some things. It flows. It's a little shorter. But editing right on the musical measure, it was a revelation to me about how 2 or 3 frames made so much difference in a flow or an abrupt feeling in what you saw. Whether it's the downbeat of the percussive part of the note, which part of the note you cut on. And Babette had all these theories, and I didn't. It took me. It's taken me quite a while, and now I think I have it figured out to differentiate between her knowledge and her opinions. And now we're getting to be on equal footing as far as battling it out about our opinions, and I know now when to defer to her knowledge and experience. And she differs to mine now also in my concepts very often. And the editing has been a very rich collaboration, and we share, as you perhaps noticed, we share the credits in the editing. It comes up over and over. Would I ever attempt to learn how to use a camera or do the editing myself? And maybe at some point I might have considered it, but my experience and as an artist is so much beyond my ability to. I wouldn't have patience to go through the mistakes of filming unless I had a lot of free time, and I don't feel I have. I feel constant pressure to realize already conceived ideas, and I don't have the patience to learn. And as long as I can get grants or whatever, I will. That's where my money will go. And I find it. Editing is very exhausting for me. It's much harder to be sitting there focusing and waiting than to actually be doing the manipulations. But in the long run, it's faster. And also, I find it very important just to talk, to have someone there, to be alone in an editing room, and to look at something over and over again by yourself. I think I would go a little crazy. I go a little crazy anyway in a small room. After 1 week of editing, I'm not. I think that's why I lost my belt to my sweater. I've been in that editing room all week. It's a very tense kind of situation. So it's good to have someone there to talk to and bat it around with. And these other pair of eyes, they see something flick by, or you see something, and then you check it out. With 4 eyes are better than 2. Or 6 eyes are better than 2. Babette wears glasses. Is it getting late? Do we have to? Yeah. Thank you very much.